Morning, everyone. Yes, there we go. All right. There's tons of things that we experience in our lives that are misrepresented. They're either given to us with false information or they're passed along as such. So one thing that we see that a lot of people have misconceived are polygraph tests. The way we think polygraph tests are conducted is incorrect, and they're not entirely as foolproof as people might think. So today I will be describing how polygraph tests are unreliable due to variations, inaccuracies by misusage of administrators, and the abilities to countermeasure the tests. First, I'm going to explain how polygraphs work and include their measurable standards. I'm going to talk about how they can be used at the advantage of test administrators to coax information out of participants, and then how countermeasures can be used in, lack for a better word, to cheat. Alright, so polygraph tests measure bodily functions, essentially. They put tubes around your chest and the pans around your stomach as well to monitor your breathing to see if there's changes. They also put the pump around your arm to monitor your blood pressure, and they put sensors on your fingers to monitor changes in sweating and skin conductivity. But none of these functions are necessarily unique to lying. So these things that happen, my hands are sweating because I'm nervous. But it doesn't mean that I'm lying about things right now. And so the Association of, the APA, I don't remember if it's, Association of American Psychological Association reports that these signs of deception, such as sweating and anxiety, can be found in innocent people, which is why 50% of innocent people end up with a false positive, as described by psychologist David Lycan, who is a modern critic in polygraph testing. And so the reason that there is a 50% false positive with innocent people is because there's large open interpretation by administrators of the test. There's been several cases where there's printed results that can be interpreted as people lying or telling the truth. So moving on, polygraph tests can also be misused and utilized at the advantage of administrators, which is not the same thing as having valid results. So these can be used to evoke confessions out of people taking the test, which will then discourage behaviors and strengthen the public confidence of polygraph tests, meaning that people will continue to have this perception that polygraph tests are utilized correctly. And so this comes from the Division of Behavioral and Social Sciences and Education at the National Academies. They've also discussed a placebo test called a bogus pipeline, in which people will be connected to a fake machine. It's just making random scribbles on the paper, but it's not actually measuring what the people are feeling. And so the people taking these tests will inevitably just tell the administrators what they want to hear. This is also from the National Academies. So next, countermeasures have the potential to undermine these test screenings because, again, this division at the National Studies justifies that there's concerns that there are countermeasures that are learnable by the people, in which cognitive and physical efforts, such as people taking drugs or alcohol prior to the test to calm their nerves. They can also use mental relaxation, or before the test, they will increase the tensions in their body so that as the test continues, it will lower. Okay. So there are too many factors that can influence false results in a polygraph test, and many of these tests are conducted, as of right now, for government employees. They're looking for people who are, espionage and spies, so they will conduct these tests to make sure that the employees will not do that. But because of this, it largely limits research efforts, which in turn leaves, because they're only researching these people who are groups of people with general and vague questions rather than specific questions. It just leaves a lot of unreliability for the tests. Thank you.
All right, well, I like the subject here, but you need to be clear on your position at the beginning. I think the notion that you say they're not foolproof, I'm going, okay, is that the claim that you're presenting? Let's get a clear propositional statement here, and I'm not sure that you do that. Then you kind of preview what the supporting structure is going to be, and you repeat the preview twice, but they're not phrased as claims, just subject matter. So I know that they're unreliable, there's an accuracy thing, and there's perhaps countermeasures that could be utilized to address those issues. So you just need to be simple in saying this claim. It should be pretty straightforward. Lie detector tests are unreliable for the purposes that they're being used for. That's my proposition. I'm going to show you first that the measurements that they're using don't lead to the conclusions that are being made. Second, that the results are often manipulated by the administrators. And finally, that there are countermeasures that people who are taking the test might employ. That's really what your argument is. And you just need to make those declarative statements. I've just kind of summarized it, and I think, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I think I did a clearer job of saying what your argument was than you did at the beginning of the speech. Now, I kind of figured this out, but it shouldn't be that hard for us to follow what you're saying. I kind of like the fact, I think it does you a good job, kind of does you credit in building your ethos when you say, look, I'm sweating right now giving this speech. I'm a little bit nervous, but that doesn't make me a liar. And that's a good lead into that first argument, which is that the things that the polygraph measures are not necessarily indicative of people not being truthful. All right, there are all kinds of reasons why people's blood pressure might change, why they might sweat more or less, why their heart rate would be altered, those sorts of things. And then you can give some examples of that kind of stuff. And I think that would make your argument a little bit clearer. You basically make that argument, but it needs to be, like I said, a little sharper as you're making it. And then you need the data to plug in on that. And I don't think that you've got as strong a data as you ought to have. The APA quote is okay at the beginning. I like the statistic that you have from Lycan that says 50% of these result in false positives. One of the things that I see in most of the evidence that you're citing is you're not giving me a direct quote from those sources. You're often paraphrasing or summarizing what you think was being said in those articles. And I think it would be clearer if you gave us the direct quotes instead of trying, because I know you're trying to make a presentation and this is my speech, and I know I don't want you to just copy somebody else's material, but I'm not sure you always clarify what it is that the article is saying, and as a result, it's not helping your argument as much as it could. And if you have the direct quotes, you give us the direct quotes, and then you can give me the interpretation of what do you think that means, and that I think would make your argument work better. So there is a structure here, it just needs to be sharper. The supporting information, there is supporting information in it, but it's not always being cited effectively, and sometimes it's being paraphrased instead of being directly quoted, and that would help you, I think, if you quoted it more directly. On the countermeasures, there's a lot of stuff here that is mostly asserted. I think that that's one of the places where there isn't evidence here. You kind of take it as a given that, well, if people take drugs or drink or they engage in some relaxation techniques, that's going to address the issue. Says who? You know, I'm sure that the people administering these polygraph tests are familiar with those kinds of things and behaviors. Don't they correct for those sorts of things? I don't know. This is right here. This is all asserted on your part, and you need some data to support that particular information. The stuff that you have at the end that talks about how well, actually right before the end, where you talk about how the tests are being used for government workers or they're being used to investigate people and might get bad results. I think that's something that you need to have at the beginning so that we know why we're even bothering to listen to this. So you start off by saying thousands of government workers are being screened by polygraphs. We're depending on them to make sure to screen out people that could be potentially dangerous, or to make sure that people who are working for us are adhering to the policies and procedures that the government's supposed to do. That's a mistake, because polygraphs don't work. They don't work because they don't measure the things accurately, or the things that they're measuring do not necessarily indicate lying. They don't work because they are misused by the administrators, and they don't work because there are countermeasures that can be utilized on this. And then go into your argument. And then the stuff about testing at the end, and that there's some problem because we don't have enough polygraph research on this. Well, that kind of contradicts all the information that you just gave us. You know, you're telling us that we've got studies that say 50% are false positives and that there are countermeasures that people can employ, but we haven't studied that enough to be able to reach those conclusions. That's just confusing. That seems like it's a separate argument that's got nothing to do with the main point that you're making, which is polygraphs don't really work. So stick to that point, clarify the claims, cite the evidence, and make sure you quote it directly, and I think that that would fix some of those problems. I do think you do a good job speaking to the audience for the most part. Like I said, it was well organized, and I like the subject a lot. I think this is an interesting point that there's a lot of controversy on that we could, have a good argument on. We just need to get that information a little sharper in the presentation. Okay? Thank you.